Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Korea Economic Institute of America. Thank you all for coming. My name is Nicholas Hamasevich, and I am the Director of Research and Academic Affairs here at KEI. We are excited to be having this interesting academic paper series event today, looking at cyber conflict and cyber warfare on the Korean Peninsula. Whenever people anticipate another North Korean provocation, cyber attacks are usually listed as a potential option for North Korea. Attacks on South Korean government websites, media organizations, and banks have been blamed on North Korea. Adding to the mix are the capabilities of sophisticated hackers that cause disruptions and make detection even more difficult. As cyber conflict issues rise in importance, as well as become more complex, understanding the key dynamics and definitions involved with cyber conflict are vital for getting policy and coordination right. And sometimes I think if you want to make a complex problem even more complex, just put it into the context of the Korean Peninsula or Northeast Asia. Fortunately, we have Dr. Stephen Kim from the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies with us here today to help us better understand some of the cyber conflict issues on the Korean Peninsula. Dr. Stephen Kim is professor at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, focusing on a wide range of foreign and security policy issues on the Korean Peninsula. He is the author of numerous publications, including North Korea's Succession, Kim Jong-un Faces Tough Strategic Decisions, Republic of Korea, Meeting the Challenges of Transnational Threats in the 21st Century, Divided Korean Public Opinion, Progressives and Conservatives, and the forthcoming publication, Looming Security Crisis on the Korea Peninsula, Danger of Escalation. He received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley, his MA from Seoul National University, and then back to the University of California, Berkeley for his PhD. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Kim.
Thank you, KEI, for inviting me to give a talk on cyber conflict in the Korean Peninsula. Though I consider, and I followed the nuclear conflict in the Korean Peninsula for now almost over a decade, I am not a computer expert. So I thought I would make that plain to everyone so that you won't be asking any hard questions about the technical aspects of the cyber conflict in the Korean Peninsula. The information I have is all based on open sources, and my views that are going to be expressing today are purely my own views on this particular topic. What I want to do is to examine the cyber conflict within the broader context of the nuclear conflict, as well as the long-standing conflict between the two Koreas ever since they came into being in 1948, in order to understand first the motivation and the strategic goal of North Korea in engaging in cyber attacks against ROK, and examine the danger of the cyber conflict possibly leading to a kinetic conflict on the Korean Peninsula. So I'm interested in understanding why more than how. And I'm really not an expert to really address some of the more technical issues regarding the cyber attacks that North Korea has launched against South Korea since 2008. So what I'm going to try to do in my talk is to talk about why. Why has North Korea launched these cyber attacks since 2008? What are their motivation? What is their strategic goal in carrying out these cyber attacks? And lastly, what are the ramifications of the cyber conflict on the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula? I think one cannot understand the genesis of the cyber conflict without putting that again in the broader context of the nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula that actually has been ongoing for now over 20 years, if you take into account the first nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula in 1993. And certainly over a decade, if you look at the nuclear conflict which began the second nuclear conflict, which began in 2003, when the six-party talks were convened by 6 parties to try to see if they could agree to a deal that would resolve the nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula. The nuclear conflict, I think, has reached a new and dangerous level on the Korean Peninsula since 2008. And let me try to explain what I mean. And again, using this as a context to understand why North Korea has began to engage in cyber attacks. When the talks broke down in 2008, because of the disagreements between the parties over the denuclearization plan based on the 2005 and the 2000 agreements reached through the 6-party talks, U.S., ROK, and Japan said they will not resume the 6-party talks unless North Korea agreed to resolve the conflict by accepting a one-shot comprehensive deal to agree to a deal that would end the conflict. And the deal I'm referring to here is North Korea giving up their nuclear weapons in return for economic aid, diplomatic ties, and security assurances from the other parties. So the other parties, again, ROK, Japan, and U.S., are refusing to resume negotiations unless North Korea agreed to the terms of the deal through a new approach to the negotiations based on one-shot comprehensive deal rather than what is known as the phased approach to negotiating the nuclear conflict. And basically, what the one-shot comprehensive deal is that all the 6 parties put all of the issues on the table and agree to a comprehensive agreement. And if they're able to do that, which would not necessitate any further negotiation, so all of the issues would be placed on the table, all the parties would negotiate, reach a comprehensive agreement, and then that would be it. And again, this is very different from the piecemeal approach in which the denuclearization process is divided into 3 discrete stages, and the 6 parties negotiate over the terms at each stage, and you don't go on to the next stage unless you've completed the stage before the previous stage. So it's piecemeal, it's incremental, and each of the stages in the denuclearization process has to be negotiated separately. And you don't advance until you've successfully completed the previous stage before advancing to the next stage. And the reason that the ROK, Japan, and U.S. demanded North Korea to accept this one-shot comprehensive deal to resolve the nuclear conflict is because they were concerned that North Korea was using the phased approach, the piecemeal negotiations approach, to develop its nuclear and missile capabilities, and that North Korea was not being sincere in trying to resolve the nuclear conflict through the 6-party process. In addition to this, ROK, with the conservative government coming into power in 2008, President Lee Myung-bak also tied aid to North Korea, economic aid, tied it to the progress in the 6-party talks. So unless there was real progress toward denuclearization, North Korea would no longer offer unilateral aid to North Korea, which had been the policy of the previous liberal government under President Roh Moo-hyun. So, so faced with this unprecedented pressure, so I think, so with this, so with the 3 countries demanding North Korea to agree to a one-shot comprehensive deal, actually put real pressure for the first time in the 6-party process on North Korea to accept a deal that would end the conflict once and for all. So faced with this unprecedented pressure, North Korea, because it wants to hold on to its nuclear weapons, to hold on to its nuclear program, North Korea was forced to escalate tensions to get the other parties to drop what he perceived to be a confrontational stance toward North Korea and toward the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. So, beginning in 2008, North Korea raises the ante and tries to put counter pressure on the other parties to back down by launching series of provocations against the ROK. 2008, with the new conservative government in power, North Korea kills a South Korean tourist in the Kumgang Mountains in North Korea. This was a tourism that South Korea had, that Hyundai Corporation had built the facilities there to enable South Korean tourists to visit this famous scenic mountain in North Korea. And then this was followed by, in 2009, a second nuclear test and an additional ballistic missile test, followed by a naval clash at the end of 2009. I believe in December. And then in 2010, North Korea sinks a South Korean naval vessel, killing 46 sailors. And at the end of that year, in December, it bombards, fires artillery rounds at an island in an area which North Korea believes is theirs and not the territory belonging to South Korea, and kills 2 military personnel and 2 civilians. This is the first time since the Korean War that an external attack has occurred on the Korean soil. And this was a tremendous shock to the Korean public. And then in 2012, North Korea conducts 2 ballistic missile tests. And the second one in December of that year is successful in launching a satellite into orbit. And then this is followed in 2013 by a 3rd nuclear test in February. And the closing of the Kaesong Industrial Complex in North Korea. This is an industrial park created by the South Korean government to allow ROK manufacturers to set up businesses employing North Korean labor in the industrial park to produce goods that would be later sent back to South Korea. The industrial park has since been reopened, but again, its future, I think, is uncertain. And this was, again, a provocation from the viewpoint of South Korea because the Kaesong Industrial Park had been a long-standing symbol of the efforts by the South Korean government to try to, in its pursuit of the policy of reconciliation and peaceful coexistence with North Korea. So, in the face of these provocations of North Korea, again, because it's trying to get the opposing sides to back down, because it raised the stakes to a such high level, South Korea ROK government simply said, if you continue, if there are further provocations, further attacks, killing military and civilians, then South Korea would respond using military force. It would not only attack the source of the attack, it would also eliminate surrounding bases of support and also take out the command structure. So this was something new. And I believe this is the reason why the Korean Peninsula is now in such a, why the security on the Korean Peninsula is now so precarious. Because the next provocation by North Korea a military provocation, I believe, will lead to a counter-military response, a joint response by ROK and the United States. And really the danger is then you have a scenario in which there may be uncontrolled escalation leading to a wider conflict on the Korean Peninsula that I think nobody wants. Now, all of the provocations that North Korea launched since 2008 have been pretty shocking and audacious, but they sort of fit a pattern of provocative behavior that North Korea has engaged in since the end of the Korean War in 1953. But beginning in 2008, North Korea opens a new front for escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula by launching cyber attacks on major against government as well as private institutions. Private institutions consisting of banks, media outlets, broadcasting stations, and so on. Financial institutions and broadcasting stations have been the primary targets of cyber attacks by North Korea. And so this is, I think, escalated tensions in what is already a very volatile situation on the Korean Peninsula. And I think these cyber attacks that are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, more destructive, and I'll have something to say, and I'll provide additional details later, have raised the concern that North Korea is possibly on the cusp of having a capability that is potentially just as, if not more destructive than anything in its conventional and unconventional military arsenal. So, without, I think, exaggerating, at least from where I sit, I think Korea Peninsula is in the front line of a new and dangerous cyber conflict that exists nowhere else in the world today. Again, I said the thrust of my presentation is really to try to understand why North Korea is engaging in these cyber attacks. And again, the cyber attacks is part of a larger efforts to try to get the opposing parties to back down and drop their confrontational stance, their pressure on North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons by binding North Korea to a negotiated settlement through the six-party process. So within this broader context, what North Korea is hoping to achieve by launching these cyber attacks is to send a strong message to the Korean government. If you don't want your computer networks to be disrupted or destroyed, that would halt operations and services. And if you don't want us to carry out ever more destructive cyber attacks against public and private institutions, then stop. Don't apply pressure. Drop your hardline stance, your confrontational stance, forcing us to accept the one-shot comprehensive deal to resolve the nuclear conflict. Also, I think the cyber attacks, again, so to put pressure on the Korean government by, for example, creating confusion, fear, and panic among the South Korean public. Right? You have a bank account with Nonghyup Bank, which is one of the big banks in South Korea, and suddenly you can't conduct your online transactions anymore. You can't use the ATM. You've got an important bill you have to pay. When KBS, the largest broadcasting company in Korea, when the workers, suddenly their computers go dead. I think that, right? So what's going on in the minds of people? So try to create this kind of a sense of panic and fear. And hopefully the Korean public will then maybe try to put pressure on their own government to maybe back down from their hardline stance. Hurt the government by inflicting economic damage, and also using computer attacks to try to foment political conflict, domestic political conflict, to sharpen the conflict that exists already between the two ideological groups in Korea, the conservatives and the liberals, maybe to get the liberals, mobilize the liberals to put pressure on the Korean government to revise its policy toward the nuclear issue. So I believe that the cyber attacks are ultimately, the purpose is to get the South Korean government, just as the more conventional provocations, to try to get the Korean government to drop its hardline stance against North Korea. The ability to carry out cyber attacks, I think, can be traced. It didn't happen overnight. Suddenly in 2008, North Korea said, look, I think if we have some sort of a cyber offensive capability, this would help us to promote our strategic interest vis-a-vis South Korea and the other parties that are trying to force us to eliminate or give up our nuclear program, which we do not want to do. So I don't think that's what happened. The North Korea's efforts, North Korea's ability to conduct cyber operations actually go back to the 1990s, maybe even earlier, to mid-1980s, in which North Korea began to acquire this capacity because, as a part of its overall plan to develop its asymmetric capabilities, to offset the growing gap, military gap, vis-a-vis South Korea. So North Korea was falling further and further behind in terms of its conventional military capabilities, and therefore they needed to find something that would offset this growing gap between South Korea. And so that is the broader context in which to understand why, for example, North Korea is interested in developing, acquiring a nuclear arms, right? That's an asymmetrical weapon that can sort of offset the conventional military weakness of North Korea vis-a-vis South Korea. So North Korea began to develop its cyber capabilities to offset this growing gap between its military with the military of South Korea. And actually there were, I think, good reasons, rationale for developing cyber capabilities, because cyber capabilities afford North Korea certain advantages over conventional military arms. If you have a cyber offensive capability, it is basically a low risk, minimal investment. So with minimal investment, if you acquire this capacity, it can yield a higher payoff in terms of promoting and advancing your strategic interest. So by acquiring this capability, North Korea found something that was basically low risk, low cost, and yet but potentially having a big impact, high impact, and was much more useful than conventional arms since it can be used for different purposes. For example, as I said, you can use cyber attacks not only to steal secrets, military secrets. You can use it to sow fear and panic. Use it in psychological operations. You can also use it to take out computer servers in order to disrupt services and operations. Use it to inflict damage. So I think, and again, North Korea has nothing to lose. right? The country doesn't have a computer infrastructure that's connected to the internet, whereas South Korea is very much connected to the internet, one of the most hardwired countries in the world. 95% of its people surf the internet, use the internet for their for various paying bills and all kinds of services. So they have nothing to lose. And therefore allowing North Korea to focus on offense. So even if South Korea wants to retaliate and engage in cyber attacks against, there's nothing to attack, basically. And also North Korea believed that it was confident that they had the brains, people with very high mathematic capabilities, or at least train such people, because that's what you need in order to crack passwords and to develop software that allows you to hack into computers. So they were confident that they had the software development capabilities. So for all of these reasons, North Korea began to acquire, develop its capabilities. And then, of course, 2008, facing this enormous pressure from the other parties to give up its nuclear program, to accept a one-child comprehensive deal, then saw that as an opportune time to put that into good use in order to advance its strategic goals. So the cyber force, this capacity, cyber capability, again, it's based on really North Korean defectors who have, or they say, or who claim to have intimate knowledge of the development of the cyber capabilities by North Korea. So there hasn't been any independent verification of the assessment made by these defectors. But I think it to me, it sounds plausible. So North Korea began to rapidly build up its force through military exchanges with China in the mid-1990s, and it established an elaborate program, according to the testimony of the North Korean defectors, of recruiting and nurturing the best of the best from an early age. Those exhibited abilities in science and in mathematics, and then providing them with systematic education and training, both. So we're talking about elementary school kids from the very selective elementary schools all over North Korea, picking out mathematical whizzes, scientific geniuses, give them intensive training through middle and senior high school, and sending them to the top science and technology institutes in North Korea. And after they complete that, they're sent abroad for further training and education, Russia and China. And when they've finished all this very long, extensive education and training, they are amply, richly rewarded. They get to go abroad to conduct their operations. And their parents are allowed to live in Pyongyang. They have special housing, access to all kinds of subsidies from the government. So they're showered with privileges that very few North Koreans are able to enjoy under the system, other than the elites who control North Korea. And so, according to this testimony, there are currently, North Korea is estimated to have 3,000 very elite hackers. They have more, but very elite hackers. Now, let me talk briefly about the cyber attacks. And again, this is based on open sources. I'm not a technical expert, and really, some of these I'm still trying to learn just exactly the nature of these attacks. According to the South Korean government, DPRK has launched 6 cyber attacks, series of cyber attacks, just as they have launched series of ever more dangerous provocations, conventional, since 2008. They have launched 6 in waves, and each successively more advanced and destructive. Right? I talked about how these attacks are becoming more sophisticated, more destructive on major ROK websites since 2008. And this is based on South Korean experts who, by doing forensics and citing similarities in the execution of attack and the virus used in all of these attacks. And let me just briefly go over some of the major cyber attacks that have occurred. In 2008, hacking attack shut down 400 computers at the Presidential Transition Office of the newly elected President Lee Myung-bak. Again, sending a message, in my opinion. Don't try to put your campaign pledges into effect. Don't adopt the hard line against South Korea. Continue the sunshine policy of your predecessor, President Roh Moo-hyun. And in 2009, at least 35 ROK and U.S. websites are paralyzed in distribution of denial of service attacks, known as DDoS attacks, where they paralyze a website by flooding, increasing traffic to that website. And then in March of 2011, ROK websites of 40 public and financial institutions, again, are disrupted. The websites are disrupted by DDoS attacks, distribution of service denial attacks. And then there is a leap in terms of the sophistication and the destructiveness of the cyber attacks against major ROK websites. In April 2011, this is where the cyber attacks reach a new dimension. The attacks shuts down a website of Nonghyuk Bank, one of the major banks in South Korea, and they take it down by launching an APT hacking attack. An APT hacking attack is different from a DDoS attack in that in an APT hacking attack, what you're trying to do is you're trying to penetrate a secured computer network and to take control of the servers, to knock out the computers that are tied to that server, and therefore disrupting operations and services. So it's much more difficult to launch this kind of APT attack, although the method is similar to the DDoS. Anyway, so this website was attacked in this APT attack. 30 million of its customers were unable to use ATMs and online services for several days, and key data were destroyed. Because in order to disable the servers, you have to delete data. And experts in South Korea consider this is the first publicly reported case of computer sabotage by one nation against a financial institution in another nation. So what North Korea actually did, to put this in proper perspective, is that they attacked a critical infrastructure, right? Financial institutions that could inflict real damage to South Koreans, to South Korean society. And in 2012, North Korea, along with attacking financial institutions, attacked 중앙일보, which is one of the major U.S. South Korean dailies, attacked the website and the server, and was able to take it off, knocking it out. The attacks continue again in 2013, and this is where the cyber attacks has become more destructive, as I think made clear. In March of this year, North Korea shuts down websites of 3 major broadcasting companies, KBS, MBC, and YTN, and 5 financial institutions, disabling services by erasing the hard drives. And this was all done simultaneously. So these websites were attacked simultaneously, disrupting operations and services. And then this is followed by another round of cyber attacks that occurred in June of this year, in which 69 ROK websites, including the presidential Blue House and the media outlets, were hacked to the same effect as in March, using a method employed in those attacks in March. And again, the South Korean government pointed the finger to North Korea for being responsible for these attacks. So in addition to the cyber attacks that are aimed at getting the South Korean government to drop its hardline stance, North Korea has also launched attacks for other purposes. And this is, if you have this cyber capability, it's useful because you can do so many different things with it. And one of the ways, and one of the areas in which they have hacked into computers, ROK computers, is to steal information, military secrets, crack passwords in order to obtain information that North Korea deems useful in its confrontation with South Korea. So espionage, spying, is now a great source of concern that North Korea will persistently try to hack into to steal military secrets, not only from the South Korean military, but the U.S. military in South Korea as well. Cyber attacks have also enabled North Korea to find another lucrative source to earn hard currency, which the regime desperately needs, especially in the light of economic sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea for its provocations since 2008. So cybercrime is increasingly important to North Korea. And some experts believe that North Korea has pretty much infiltrated, penetrated South Korean cyberspace. It has hacked into financial institutions to steal money from private and corporate accounts. It hacks into computers to steal personal information and then sells the personal information to individuals in South Korea. They also sell illegal hacking programs, and they've also created and managed, with South Korean accomplices, servers of gambling websites, which they can also use to spread malware in order to conduct DDoS attacks. So some believe that I talked about the North Koreans who have successfully completed their training and education are sent abroad. Many, according to reports, are in China. And during the day, they may be working in legitimate companies, developing computer software, working for Chinese companies, or freelancing. But at night, they may be using those same, working for the North Korean government at the same time. And again, I think cybercrime is important not only because that North Korea is using this to earn hard currency, but also because the more skilled you are in engaging in these types of activities, it also hones your skills to launch cyber attacks, to disable servers, to disrupt operation services. The same skills are needed for both. The cyber attacks also, I think, has many South Koreans worried. Certainly has the government worried, because they believe that these cyber attacks that destroy or disrupt computer networks and thereby affecting the operations and services are designed also to create panic and social chaos, to get people nervous, afraid of what might happen next. And thereby maybe also, it is clear, and there's growing evidence that North Koreans are stealing personal IDs and then disguising themselves as ROK netizens and opening accounts and portal sites to do what? To spread rumors and propaganda in order to make the ROK public lose confidence and trust in their own government, as well as to create domestic conflict between the two ideological blocs that you find in Korean society today, between the conservatives and the liberals who have different views on the nuclear issue and what the policy should be toward North Korea and so on. So foment dissension, undermine public confidence in their government, and to create panic in the hopes that all of this would lead the South Korean government to change its policy toward North Korea, to change its policy toward the nuclear issue. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the Anonymous that some of you may have read about, right? Anonymous, I think, is real. It is an international hacking group. And this is the wild card that have been injected into the cyber conflict in the Korean Peninsula. And potentially complicating the situation. It's clear that the Anonymous in 2013 did hack into DPRK websites to obtain usernames, email addresses, and passwords of the members who have joined these North Korean sponsored websites that explain North Korean policies on issues and so on. And they've also carried out DDoS attacks on several DPRK sites, such as the state-owned Error Cordial. Leading up to the anniversary of the Korean War, June 25th, they issued a warning that I think caught everyone's attention. They said, or they claimed that they were going to use or had a special software program to infiltrate and shut down DPRK's intranet, which was a pretty audacious claim to make, that somehow they penetrated a system that is not connected to the internet to sow dissension and conflict and to criticize the North Korean regime in the internet system that, again, only a select group of North Koreans would actually have access to. And if North Korea did not want to be attacked, then it must give up its nuclear programs, provide uncensored internet to the North Korean people, establish democracy in North Korea, and that Kim Jong-un must resign. Well, the attack I don't think has occurred or didn't occur. There are no signs that they have hacked into the internet system of North Korea. But the reason I say this is a wild card is because they have hacked into DPRK-sponsored websites. And North Korea has claimed that Anonymous simply is a front used by ROK in the U.S. to launch cyber attacks against North Korea. Now, whether they actually believe this or not, we don't know. But that's what they're saying. Therefore, giving them the pretext and excuse to launch their own cyber attacks against South Korea. And the cyber attacks that occurred in April 2011 in June of this year, where 69 ROK websites were hacked into. Now, North Korea is, I think the government claims, is responsible, but it was disguised such that that was the work of the Anonymous. So if North Korea was responsible, then they were trying to hide their identity by saying that these attacks had been taken or had been conducted by the anonymous group. So both sides. So this is a wild card. Now, so what has been ROK's strategy to counter these threats? I think the recognition has been belated, but I've listed some of the things that the ROK government is trying to do in terms of shoring up its cyber defenses against the attacks coming from North Korea. And they've made organizational changes. The Ministry of Defense organized a cyber command in 2010 and has decided to increase its personnel from 500 to 1,000. More importantly, the ROK government has established a unified command structure in which, in order to have a more effective and more speedy response to cyber attacks, they've under this new structure, they've made the Presidential Blue House be responsible for overseeing and coordinating the whole of government response to the cyber attacks, and the National Intelligence Agency being the organization that would implement the policies of the Presidential Blue House. ROK has also developed, along with the U.S., various deterrent scenarios in order to better deal with emerging cyber threats from North Korea. So U.S. and ROK governments cooperating to come up with plans of joint response to cyber attacks on ROK and U.S. websites. The U.S. government is also, I think, is going to provide computer hardware and software and provide training and to conduct exercises, cyber response exercises jointly with South Korea. The South Korean government, because they're concerned now that North Korea will attack other critical infrastructures other than financial institutions, including power, transportation, electricity, and so on, they have decided to disconnect the nuclear power plants from the internet. And I think they plan to disconnect all of the important critical infrastructures, controlling transportation, energy, and so on, electricity, sever the connection with the internet. And by 2017, they plan to boost cybersecurity budget to $9.7 billion, which they plan to use by 2017 and train 5,000 cyber experts. And I think the South Korean government has even announced a more ambitious plan to counter the cyber attacks. They've said they're going to develop the technology to establish an intelligent network covering the whole country by installing smart routers to prevent cyber attacks at their source. Now, I've said this without really understanding what this actually means, but so this is a technological measure to try to protect and to augment and strengthen the South Korean internet system from cyber attacks, external cyber attacks, and U.S. has and is much more advanced in having developed this intelligent network system, but South Korea plans to invest enormous amounts of money to begin the research, and I think, and according to the report, South Korean government already has important patents, so they may actually. And I'll come to my last slide again. So, what is this emerging cyber conflict? What is it? What are its ramifications for peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula? Again, tying it to the larger nuclear conflict and to the larger, long-standing conflict between the two Koreas, since the two Koreas were founded in 1948. And I think this is important because this current standoff in the nuclear conflict, I think, will continue. And if it continues, North Korea will continue to resort to escalations to get the opposing parties to give up their confrontational stance, to enable North Korea to hold on to its nuclear program and nuclear weapons. And then, coupled with the fear that North Korea, so it has the intent, but the fear that now it has the capability to inflict more serious damage to critical infrastructures in Korea that will result in possibly major loss of life and property. Right, just think, South Korea is probably the most hardwired country in the world. Everything is connected and is operated by some computer network and affects the daily lives of people. And the irony of this is that on the other side of the border, you have a country that is completely the opposite. You know, you've seen the satellite images of North and South Korea at night. So a country that is the least developed in terms of connectivity versus a country that is probably the most connected country in the world. Leaders in IT, information and technology, one of the innovators. I think CNN recently came out with a report. If you want to see what the future is going to be like, and how information technology is going to affect people, go to South Korea. And you can see the future now. You don't have to wait 10, 20 years. So I think this is where, so another provocation, whether it's conventional or another nuclear test, another missile test, or is it going to be another attack, sinking a attack on a military target? Is it going to be another attack on civilians? Or another and more destructive attack on the critical infrastructure of in the ROK? And really, I think, just as ROK government has said, any further conventional provocation will lead to a response. ROK government may have to, at some point, try to deter North Korea from launching even a more massive cyber attack by making it very clear that there would be consequences should North Korea attempts to do so. And if deterrence fails, ROK will have to take resolute actions to punish North Korea for its transgressions. So the cyber conflict, I believe, in the Korean Peninsula has raised already what is a very dangerous situation to even a higher level, creating a real tinderbox waiting to go off, depending on what North Korea does next on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you. That sort of concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Lots of interesting stuff for us to talk about. So we'll now open up to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We have a couple microphones that'll come around, and state your name and affiliation. Yes, in the back, please.
We're based in Arlington and do strategy and policy consulting with regard to cybersecurity. And I had a question with regard to your smart network bullet, which discusses being able to stop cyber attacks at your source. Do you have a news source regarding that piece?
Oh, absolutely. I can. If you give me a card, I'll send you the news sources. Okay. It's already been reported in several major dailies, 동아일보, 중앙일보, and so on. Yes, again, based on open sources.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, please. Right.
Hi, I'm Grant Gross. I'm a reporter for PC World and other tech magazines. It sounds like you're implying that the North Korean attacks will continue until there is some kind of retaliation. Can you kind of give a prediction of where this might be going? When does it stop?
You talking about the cyber?
Yeah,
Just the cyber?
just a second.
I don't think it will stop. It will not stop until North Korea believes, or they see ROK, U.S. and Japan dropping their hardline stance of applying pressure on North Korea to accept a deal, a nuclear deal that would end the conflict. And again, the deal I'm referring to is giving up nuclear weapons for economic aid, diplomatic ties, and security assurances. So unless they see a real shift in the position of ROK, Japan, and U.S., then I think North Korea believes that it has no other alternative than to up the ante, continue to push the envelope, continue to up the ante until the other side backs down. North Korea believes that eventually, and that strategy has been pretty successful so far, that in the face of North Korean belligerence, in fact, even if you look at the six-party process itself, when North Korea raises the ante, the other side backs down and become more amenable to what North Korea wants from them. So as long as this standoff continues to exist, I think it provides North Korean regime with the motivation to continue to resort to cyber attacks. And again, actually the cyber attacks, the likelihood of cyber attacks is actually higher than the likelihood of North Korea sinking another South Korean vessel, military naval vessel, or another artillery bombardment, killing civilians and military personnel. Why? Because there's no doubt that if there's another military provocation, South Korea, in fact, there will be a joint response. South Korea, U.S. joint response, military response to a conventional provocation. So North Korea is actually, if they want to raise the ante, continue to push the envelope, then I think we'll have to resort to cyber attacks. Low risk, low cost, high impact, right? If what the experts say are true. And with the difficulty of attribution thrown in there, right? Because they know that unless the other side is completely convinced that the attacks are coming from North Korea, that they're not likely to respond, right?
Okay, another question? Yes, please.
Thank you. Justin Anderson, SAIC, and I have two related questions. You spoke quite a bit about, or used the language of deterrence in your presentation. And classic deterrence literature talks about the importance of communicating to an opponent, communicating quite clearly, if you do X, we will potentially respond with Y that will hurt you or harm you.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on what the ROK government has done to communicate to DPRK if you cross some future notional cyber.
A red line, cyber red line.
We will respond in a manner, in such a manner. And then my second related question is, deterrence literature also talks a great deal about it's critical to have capability to actually back up your threats. So what sort of capability to respond to a cyber attack does the ROK have? You spoke quite a bit in terms of what they've done on defensive side, better defenses, but are they considering some type of cyber offensive response? Because I think a distinction is still understood by a lot of people between a cyber attack, in as much as it's difficult for data to be lost, versus a cyber attack that, say, opens a dam or some type of physical damage that you then respond with a physical attack. Thank you.
The first question. If I wasn't clear, then I should clarify what I said. The ROK government has not yet communicated to the North Korean regime about what would happen to North Korea should North Korea launch another devastating or destructive cyber attack. The only account I read in the papers is that after, I think, the March 2013 cyber attacks, a reporter asked the Ministry of Defense, so what is the South Korean government going to do now? He said, well, if we pinpoint the source of the attack to North Korea, then we might have to take some action. Might have to take some action without explaining what that action. So the point that I'm trying to make is that South Korean government, I hope, and I am sure it is, thinking about to deter, if they're going to deter another cyber attack, will have to communicate very clearly and draw some red line that if North Korea crosses that line, will be punished. They haven't done so, was the point. But they need, and they're probably working on it now. So this is something that unless the ROK government is able to articulate and clearly communicate this to the North Korean regime, then I think it's opening itself to further cyber attacks by North Korea. Second, that's right. The South Korean government is not talking about, or I haven't seen in open sources openly talking about developing offensive cyber capabilities that he could use against North Korea. And again, you wonder what offensive capabilities might be developed given the fact that, as I've already said, North Korea is one of the least connected countries in the world. So there's some major challenges. But the South Korean government has created a cyber command in 2010. So I'm assuming that one of the things they're doing there is thinking about that possibly, just as the U.S. Cyber Command has stated that it is developing defensive as well as offensive cyber capabilities. So I'm assuming that they're probably thinking along the same lines. But again, it's going to be a challenge to develop such offensive capabilities against North Korea.
Another question? Yes. In the back.
Ronald Warren from the Foreign Service Institute. A two-part question. The first one is, you identified China as a possible source for training and providing expertise that North Korea has developed. To the best of your knowledge, has South Korea made this point to China, and if so, what points have they made? Secondly, what is the possibility of having a more global response to this cyber attack? Would it be possible, for example, through the United Nations or other groups to indicate that this is beyond the bounds of what international states will accept?
I have to be careful here in trying to explain what the South Korean government's position is with respect to China in talking about the cyber attacks being carried out by North Korea. The South Korean government, as well as experts, believe that North Korean hackers may be those who are in China, may be using, may be carrying out their activities from China. In many of the attacks have been routed through China. They found IP addresses in China, but that doesn't necessarily mean, therefore, that there is some sort of connection between the North Korean government and the Chinese government. So I think that is pretty clear. I think the South Korean government, especially with cybercrime, and again, it may not only be North Korean hackers, it could be the Korean ethnic population, Korean ethnics who live in China, that may also be involved. And of course, they would be Chinese citizens. But clearly, from all the open source accounts I've read, North Koreans are reluctant to carry out these cyber attacks from North Korea. because they can be more easily traced back to North Korea simply because their internet system is not very well developed. So they prefer carrying out these attacks in third countries, maybe in China, maybe elsewhere as well. According to, again, to press account, our open sources, North Koreans have sent these people, the best of the best that they've trained, to Europe, to Russia, as well as China. And they may be, again, that would seem to indicate that they're carrying out these attacks from third countries rather than carrying them out from North Korea. And because it makes it more difficult to trace and to detect the sources of the attacks. So that would be the merit of doing that. And certainly China is part of that picture. And probably there needs to be closer cooperation between China and ROK, closer consultation regarding these cyber activities in which China may be unwittingly be part of. So hopefully, when South Korean government sits down with in the defensive consultation talks, bring these issues to their attention. The larger UN effort, the UN has recently come out with a report about the need, pointing to the need for international cooperation in dealing with cyber threats in terms of developing norms and rules for dealing with cyber threats, to draw red lines, to deter and prohibit cyber attacks. They've also talked about the need to cooperate in terms of sharing best practices, sharing information, working together to better deal with international cyber threats. So clearly, that's right. The more collective effort is made at the international level, that would be more effective in terms of maybe dampening and reducing cyber threats than what South Korean government alone can do, or even with U.S. cooperation can do in terms of dealing with the cyber threats. And believe me, the South Korean government is trying. They tried to put the cyber issue on the agenda of the G20 meeting. They brought these cybersecurity issues in all of their multilateral consultative meetings, because I think the South Korean government realizes that this is a problem that it cannot effectively deal with on its own. So believe me, from all the open source accounts I've read, the South Korean government, there was a recent multilateral meeting in South Korea of all of the vice ministers of defense, I believe, from all over East Asia. And again, South Korea placed that agenda. There was a recent Seoul Cyber Conference, a huge international conference. Its third iteration this year, and it was held in Seoul this year. And again, cybersecurity was one of the sessions, or they had two sessions devoted to cybersecurity. So South Korea now is the country that is now most exposed, and where there is the real possibility of a cyber conflict leading to a kinetic conflict on the Korean Peninsula. And I hate to be the president of South Korea. You have to go to bed at night thinking, what if there's an attack, right, that destroys a dam and releases water, or some sort of a devastating attack on a critical infrastructure leading to loss of life, significant loss of life or property. Every night, I think the South Korean president, more than any other president of any other country in the world today, right now, really can't stretch his or her legs at night, is the expression, because of the concern and the fear that with the continuing confrontation, continuing standoff, the North Korea will be tempted more and more to resort to cyber strikes. To change the current status quo on the Korean Peninsula with respect to the nuclear conflict.
Other questions? Yes, on this side over here.
Hi, I'm Chen from the Clone Group. So 2 questions. One question is to your previous answer for the lack of communication between North Korean and South Korean government. So what do you think is the major reason why they are not willing to take a stronger stance against North Korea? And the second question is, what do you see the potential risk for North Korea to attack multinational companies that have operations in South Korea? And do you think the prevention that the South Korean government is taking will be enough to prevent the further attacks? Thank you.
Okay, I didn't quite understand the first question. Why isn't South Korea doing enough to what?
To communicate with North Korean government or taking
To deter, prevent further cyber attacks?
Yeah, or to take a stronger stance. Why?
Against the cyber attacks?
Yes.
Okay. That's right. I think the South Korean government needs to take, or has to start thinking about taking a stronger stance to try to deter North Korea from conducting and engaging in more destructive attacks against this critical infrastructure. But maybe so I think the South Korean government needs to act and has to come up with a policy fairly soon, given the high likelihood of further cyber attacks by North Korea. But the South Korean government maybe one of the concerns is that they have to be very careful, very judicious, because of all the uncertainties. And because once you draw a red line, that really tempts the North Koreans to cross that red line, right? To push the envelope, raise the ante, go ahead, what are you going to do now? We've crossed the red line. If you look at the history of the nuclear conflict in the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. has drawn many red lines, and North Korea has crossed those red lines. So unless you're really ready and able, and you're really willing to back up what you say, then don't say it. Until you are capable and you have the determination, you have the courage, you're willing to accept all the risks involved in taking resolute action. So I don't think, so it really is going to be a very careful deliberation process on the part of South Korean government to come up with a red line, although the necessity and the need for it is urgent, in my opinion. I sort of forgot to say multinational companies. If they had the choice between attacking a multinational company in ROK versus a South Korean company, I think they would rather prefer to attack the South Korean company because you don't want to make too many enemies. And really, the purpose of the cyber attack is to advance North Korean interest vis-a-vis South Korea, right? Create panic and fear, inflict damage, get the South Korean government to change its policy toward North Korea, right? Right now, for North Korea, South Korea is the main adversary. That is the target that you want to put pressure on to change. It's not the U.S., it's not Japan. It's South Korea, because South Korea has taken such a strong stand and has made it very clear that South Korea cannot live, I repeat, cannot live with a nuclear-armed North Korea. Will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. So, and really that's the position of both the conservatives and the liberals, actually. So, if you want to hold on to your nuclear weapons, you don't want to give them up, then I would think you need to change. You need to somehow find a way to influence the South Koreans.
Another question all the way in the back.
Hi, Jenny, also from Delta Risk. So I want to elaborate a little bit on the topic of deterrence and red lines that you talked about. In the cyber domain, it's been well debated and in a way established that establishing deterrence is difficult for mainly two reasons. One, it's hard to attribute attacks back to the point of origin, to establish a target to attack back. And two, also it's difficult to calibrate a similar level of damage back to the attacker. And I believe these challenges also apply to the Korean Peninsula as well as cyber conflict in other parts of the world, which is also precisely why, in other cyber conflicts, these incidents have not been readily raised to the kinetic level. So in this context, what do you see as the strategic utility of ROK responding to this North Korean cyber threat by trying to establish deterrence, versus other measures such as active defense or collaborating with the private sector to bolster defenses?
Well, I don't think it's an either or. That's South Korean, the government is clearly trying to fortify its defenses and trying to foster private-public cooperation. Is doing everything, or at least has drawn up plans to try to defend the computer networks of both private and public networks in the ROK. And they've had plans to make enormous investment to do so. Because I believe ROK is in the front line, and I think in that sense, South Korea is going to be the pioneer. This is not some abstract intellectual discussion about the merits of can you actually, can have deterrence, about can you, deter cyber attacks and how do you draw red lines and so forth. South Korean government really has to wrestle with these issues. And actually, I think the international community is wrestling with these issues at the same time, that in spite of those difficulties, in fact, there was a recent efforts underway by NATO in the EU about can you apply conventional rules of war to cyber conflict? If country A conducts a attack on the critical infrastructure of country B, resulting in significant loss of life and or property, then can you apply the conventional rules of war to give justification for country B to respond militarily to a cyber attack against country A, right? So if there's an attack on critical infrastructure, it results in high loss of life, then is that an act of war in a conventional way? And does that justify a conventional military response, even though not a shot has been fired? Nobody has fired a gun. Nobody has fired a tank. Nobody has shot a missile. But does that justify? Is that an act of war? Justifying? So these issues are now being debated, I think. And already I referred to that manual that and try to apply and come up with. That's why we need rules and norms now. That's why the international community, the UN, with their new report, has recognized the importance of developing rules and norms governing interstate behavior with respect to cyber conflict and trying to formulate those red lines so that everyone is absolutely clear. So if deterrence fails and country A attacks country B, then giving the justification for country B to act and retaliate against country A for some sort of a devastating cyber attack on critical infrastructure. And really, the ROK government really is at the very front line. And I hope the best minds in Korea, I hope, are thinking long and hard about these issues, because their future is at stake. And this could happen tomorrow, a month from now, a year from now. The chances of it happening are, I think, extremely high if this standoff continues over the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay. Yes, question right over here.
I'm Jara Kim from Johns Hopkins SAIS, and you have mentioned that the cyber conflicts have a great effect on the general public. They are most vulnerable, as you can see from the Nungyap incident, and I'm wondering about your take on whether the Korean government has effectively communicated with the general public about the perils of cyber conflict, and also about their new structure in addressing cyber conflicts, about instating a control tower. My knowledge is that there has been constant criticism regarding the past structure, that there is a lack of a control tower, and I'm wondering why it took such a long time for the government to eventually place the Blue House as this so-called control tower. Thank you.
I think the South Korean government could do better in terms of communicating with the public and trying to educate and trying to mobilize public support for its policies with respect to cyber conflict. A better job of educating the public, being more open with the public about the ramifications of further cyber attacks by North Korea. Certainly the South Korean can do better. The government can do better in terms of addressing these issues. And I think they will be forced to, even if that is something they don't relish, because they have drawn out plans to invest enormous sums of money. And you've got to justify why the government is spending so much money on training cyber experts, shoring up defenses. I mean, the Nonghyuk Bank, after they were attacked, I believe, in 2010 or 2011, said that they are now allocating a budget close to $500 million to shore up its cyber defenses. That's just one bank. These cyber attacks are extremely costly. Even the limited DDoS attacks in 2009 resulted in economic loss of close to $50 million. Since 2009 to 2013, the economic damages have been estimated close to $1 billion US dollars, and that's probably not even very accurate in terms of the actual economic damage. And I think if the government is working on trying to deter further provocations by making their policies clear, then they need to also justify that to the Korean public, why these policies are needed, why these red lines are needed to deter further cyber attacks by North Korea. Did that address the second part of your question, or? The control tower. Well, there is now a control tower. The presidential Blue House is the control tower. It has the responsibility to oversee and manage cyber threats because the cyber response for the cyber attacks is sort of distributed across the various government agencies. So that's right. There was no one there was no control tower. So you had the military, you had the different agencies within the government, the military, the government agencies that protect the private computer networks, and so now to have a effective and speedy whole of government response, they've established Presidential Blue House as the control tower, headed by the National Security Advisor. And then NIS, the National Intelligence Service, acts as the operating arm, the one who implements the policies decided by, I guess, the Presidential Blue House. So there is now a command structure, a unified command structure. So everyone knows who's in charge and then all the respective agencies under that organizational chart has their own specific responsibilities. And they've come up with other ways to increase interagency cooperation, interagency communication, and so on. So that structure has been set in place. Whether that structure is really, we'll have to wait and see how effective that is going to be in terms of dealing with a cyber response to an attack. But at least now the structure is in place, which is good. But it may take time before everything is gelled in place. But hopefully they're working on it.
Okay, I think we're up on time. So thank you all for coming. And if you'll join me in thanking Dr. Stephen Kim for this great presentation.